Hello there. Welcome to the Saroid channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing well and are fighting fit. And you know the rules. Go and get yourself something lovely and warm to drink to wipe away those winter chills, because we're all getting a lot colder now that the weather has dropped significantly. So before we do that, don't forget that we've got a very exciting twist to our story tonight, because we're going to find out exactly what happened to Aunt Helena and why it is that she lost her memory. What did actually happen to her? We're about to find out. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with the final part of our story tonight. It was several days later that my wife's sister Helena moved into our farmhouse with us, even though she only lived a hair's breadth away from us, in a very similar house to our own. Dr. Levine had saliently advised her that she needed to be around her family for the time being, while her memory was somewhat fragmented. Thank God that slowly but surely Helena was regaining her memory. But I have to admit it was a long, laborious ride, with lots of bumps and jolts along the way to overcome. I'm very glad to say Helena finally remembered my wife was her sister. She also recalled my son Hunter, but I hasten to say for a long time she looked at me rather suspiciously, as if she thought I was an interloper that had weaved my way into the family, rather like an unsightly vine vandalizing a rosebed. Until, of course, my wife showed her pictures of our wedding day, to try and convince her that yes, she was indeed married to me. "Oh, I think I do remember you," she said to me suddenly, with almost a triumphant smile on her face. She looked up at me with a road map of worry lines across her forehead. "You fly planes for a living, don't you? You're a pilot." "That's right," I said. "You're doing very well. I think your memory is coming back. You would think that when a person had recovered from amnesia, that they would remember everything at once. But unfortunately, that is not how the brain works. The memory can be exceedingly patchy, and sometimes people can recall things that never actually happened to them, which in itself is rather incredulous. Think about it when you see someone in the supermarket and they come up to greet you. They seem familiar to you. They appear to know you, but you don't know where you know them from. Your memory betrays you, eludes you, and for a long time you can't even remember that person's name. Then maybe several days later, or even weeks, it all comes back to you, and you say, 'Oh yes, I remember who that woman was.' That was how ambiguously foggy it was for Helena. It was my wife Bridget who promptly suggested I took Helena back to the rock pools where she'd previously had her bizarre accident, of which no answers as to what had actually happened to her were even remotely forthcoming. Everything about what had happened was swathed in an aura of mystery. Helena loved those rock pools, my wife explained. "That's where she had the nasty accident. I believe going back there might jog her memory, Anton. I might remind you that her mountain bike was discovered propped up under a tree by the large rock pool. I actually found it myself. So that is where she must have been when she sustained that nasty gash on her head. So going back there is a very good idea as far as I'm concerned. Sometimes going back to the scene of an accident can do wonders for the memory." "You really believe that, do you?" I asked my wife cynically, not believing for a single second that her reasoning made any sense at all. My wife, of course, nodded her head vigorously. I knew by the resolutely determined look on her face there would be no arguing with her. Not on this one, anyway. To convince me further that this was a very good idea, she said, "It's like when you fall off a horse, isn't it? You get straight back on, don't you? They say if you don't get back on the horse after a nasty injury you've sustained, that you might never ever ride again. I think it's very important for Helen to go back to the place where she took that unfortunate tumble, although God knows what really happened to her. I think you should take your swimming trunks along with you and make the experience fun for her. It's very important to do that. It's a very beguiling day today, and it would be good for the both of you to spend some time together. Helena's not entirely convinced you're my husband yet, even though I showed her all the wedding photographs. I still think she believes you're an imposter who has intruded into our lives, which is rather funny, actually. The other day she was telling me that you need watching. I don't think she entirely trusts you. So on this little outing, you can persuade her just how trustworthy you actually are."
"Tell me about it," I said. "Your sister definitely thinks I'm an imposter. The looks she sometimes gives me are unsettling, to say the very least. Anyone would think I'd hijacked the entire family and were holding you all to ransom."
"Don't take it personally, love. She certainly doesn't mean to offend you. Her memory is a little twisted at the moment. Think about it, it's rather like untangling a bundle of knitting that's got so badly knotted up you almost give up. She has to work her way through all those tangles to make sense of everything. So you will take her to the rock pools, won't you?"
"I don't know, love, if that's a good idea. As you keep saying, she's a bit wary of me. Besides anything else, would she really want to remember how she sustained her head injury in the first place? Maybe it's a good thing she can't remember something like that. I'm not sure I'd want to remember." My wife waved her hand in the air dismissively.
"What are you talking about, Anton? Listen to yourself. Honestly, I sometimes despair with your nonsensical thinking at times. Of course Helena wants to remember everything. It bothers her that she has no memory of what actually happened to her. It's like she's got missing pieces from her somewhat fractured life, so to speak. She needs to put it together to make sense of everything. Imagine for a moment what it would be like for you if you couldn't remember whole chunks of your life. How would that make you feel, Anton?"
"I wouldn't like it a bit," I admitted. "I guess I would be looking for answers, like your sister obviously is."
"There you go, then. I prove my point, don't I? At the very least, just humour her for me, Anton. Take her to the beautiful rock pools. It'll do her a great deal of good. And at the very least, it'll be fun to have an outing."
"So you really want me to do this, then? Spend the morning with your sister at the rock pools, in the vain hope it might just recover her memory for her?"
"That's the idea, love. It's important for her to have a great time. Let her hair down a bit. Enjoy herself. Dr. Levine says amnesia patients go through an enormous amount of stress, as not remembering stuff can be very overwhelming for them. It can knock the stuffing right out of them. I can't imagine what that poor woman has been through. It doesn't bear thinking about. Imagine waking up and not knowing who the hell you are. It would freak me out for sure."
"Me too," I agreed.
"I tell you what, why don't you take the 4-seater ATV with you to get to the rock pools? I don't believe riding bicycles at this stage would be a great idea. I would of course come with you, but I need to do some tennis coaching. I'm having to take on some of Helena's students, so I'm super busy at the moment, having to work twice as hard for Helena's sake, until finally she gets back on her feet again. I've got so much to do. Helena, unfortunately, is still not up to speed again, to regain her position as a tennis coach yet, with her memory in tatters in the way it is. I doubt she even remembers her students. But let's just say we need to be positive about this. She's making excellent progress, and we need to be happy about that."
"I think she's doing remarkably well," I agreed. "And I'm quite sure she'll come right. The doctors seem sure she'll make a full recovery and be back to her old self again. But I guess we need to exercise a little patience, as you were saying. After all, Rome was not built in a day, was it?"
"I couldn't have put it better myself, Anton. Getting back to my point, if I may, it'll do the world of good for Helena to enjoy herself in a relaxing environment, and nothing could be better than those rock pools. They're idyllic. They really are. Dr. Levine told me the more relaxed she is, the more likely she is to remember. As he says, when you let go of your inhibitions and release the stress that you pile upon yourself, that is when miracles occur.
Helena loves those rock pools, even though I'm sure she can't remember them. So I think it would be great for her to go back there again, splash around in the water like a child, and have the time of her life while she's doing it." "If you say so, love," I said in a very flat, uninspired voice that betrayed my complete lack of enthusiasm about the job I was about to undertake. Even a flight to a luxury island seemed less intimidating than my wife's sister somehow. My wife reached out to hug me, kissing me gently on the cheek. "I knew you wouldn't let me down, Anton." I reluctantly found myself agreeing to take Helena in the ATV, along with my son Hunter, who was extremely enthused about the prospect of going swimming at the rock pools. I, on the other hand, was not so exhilarated by this thankless task, but I knew my wife Bridget needed me to pull my weight around the place, especially given she was working so hard. So I needed to watch over my wife's sister Helena for a while, splashing around in a rock pool. It was hardly what I would call a big ask. Needless to say, my son Hunter was very excited about showing Aunt Helena one of her favourite old haunting grounds that she would regularly frequent. He seemed to love reminding his aunt about all the stuff she'd forgotten about, as if he considered it his job to help Aunt Helena remember everything she had forgotten, which I thought was rather sweet of him. I couldn't help but feel that Hunter was by nature a very considerate young man. "You say I loved going there?" Aunt Helena asked Hunter, looking somewhat bemused. "Well, it sounds perfectly delightful, doesn't it? I do rather like the idea of swimming in a rock pool, but I can't remember having ever done so before. But it does seem that swimming would be something I would probably enjoy."
"You didn't just enjoy it, Aunt Helena. You really, really loved it. You'd swim there all the time,"
Hunter boldly informed her.
"You said it was your favourite piece of paradise. That's what you called it. Sometimes I would go swimming there with you when you invited me to come along. I really loved going with you, but I had to get permission from Mum, and sometimes she wouldn't let me come. We'd ride our bicycles together down the dirt road from the house, and then we'd go down the woodland trail until we got to the rock pool. We would prop up our bicycles against a tree, and then we would go and hide behind some shrubbery to change into our swimming costumes. We had so much fun together, splashing around in the water. After you taught tennis with Mum, you would often come to the rock pools to refresh yourself and to have a swim, especially if it was a very, very hot day. Mum never ever came with you. She hates swimming. You'd beg her to come with you sometimes, but she refused. She never liked getting wet. But she's always described you as a water baby. You really don't remember any of this?"
"No, I'm afraid to say, Hunter, I don't remember anything," Helena admitted. She looked a tad frustrated. But as far as I was concerned, she was making steady progress, and slowly but surely beginning to remember things. I was certain her memory would finally come back. But whether she would recall how she'd fallen over and gashed her head was debatable. I felt my wife was being incredibly optimistic to believe that she could remember that. I say all this because I do vividly recall being in a car accident when I was all but 15 years old. I remember waking up in a hospital ward, being attended to by a couple of very devoted but worried nurses. Luckily, the injuries I sustained had been all but superficial, and I have absolutely no memory of what happened either before or after that accident. I couldn't help but feel Helena could be unlikely to remember how she sustained her injuries, but I kept those thoughts privately to myself. There was no point in poking the cat. The ATV whizzed down the undulating paths of the woodgrove on what I would describe as a spectacularly beautiful day. Prisms of bright morning sunshine danced through the branches of the trees, dappling everything in a very flattering, rather ethereal light. It was pleasant to be caught in this dreamy, seemingly subterranean oasis. Before long we reached the rock pools, where a waterfall of white water thundered down the rock face, and curtains of beautiful water gushed obstreperously into the large rock pool. The place was so magical that even I found myself feeling excited about taking a swim in that water, even though, like my wife, I've never professed to be much of a swimmer. Before long we were all using the shrubbery, whereupon we could modestly change into our swimming clothes. Although the place was quiet, there were occasions when strangers might decide to swim in the rock pools, and I hoped that we would have the place all to ourselves today. Before long we were diving into the water, splashing around happily, and having a good laugh together. It seemed that Helena had not forgotten how to swim. It was almost instinctive with her, and I sincerely hoped it would be the same when Helena returned to coaching tennis. I did know from my wife that Helena was an exceptional teacher, and I thought it would be such a pity to lose those skills. All of a sudden we were playing around in the water, laughing and tossing a ball around that my son had brought along for the ride. I had this profound sense that something was watching us. I wondered if I was imagining this. It really had not seemed like we would be disturbed, but I had a profound sense that someone had intruded on our space. Perhaps someone this morning had ventured down the trail and was spying on us through the shrubbery. It was, I will admit, a slightly discomposing thought. I glanced briefly from Helena to my son, who was splashing around gregariously in the water, obliviously unaware of what I had sensed. I told myself, with a lot of persuasion, that I was being stupid. There was probably nothing there after all. I was surprised when Hunter was the first one to get out of the water. I would have joined him, of course, but I didn't want to leave Helena unattended. I would not hear the end of it from my wife, that was for sure. The bad news was that Helena didn't seem in a rush to get out of the water. By the time she did, I figured out that my fingers would be all shriveled up. Even if Helena could not remember the rock pools, she was a water baby, and that was certain. "I'm going to get dressed, Dad," said Hunter, climbing out of the water. He walked over casually to the ATV to retrieve his folded clothes on one of the seats. Along with a towel, he dried himself roughly and promptly went to hide behind some shrubbery, undoubtedly to get dressed back into his shorts and T-shirt. This is what he told me happened next, in his own words. Hunter: "I found some respectable shrubbery far enough away from the rock pool, where I could remove my swimming trunks and change into my shorts and T-shirt, without making a spectacle of myself, as I didn't want to undress in front of Aunt Helena. I felt so invigorated and refreshed from the swim. It really had been fun. I was smiling contentedly to myself. I had really enjoyed spending time with my father and with Aunt Helena. It was not often that I got to spend quality time with my father. Even though I guess he'd refused to admit it, I could see he was thoroughly enjoying himself as he tossed a ball from me to Aunt Helena. He claimed not to be a water person, but I beg to differ. I don't think I'd seen my father look this happy and this relaxed in such a long time. I was, of course, sad that Aunt Helena couldn't remember her favourite haunt, for these rock pools have always been so very special to her over the years. But it didn't matter. She was enjoying herself now, and I was sure she'd want to come back here again and again in the future. I suspected she'd remain in the rock pool for a lot longer, splashing around in the water like she always used to. My father would invariably be compelled to stay with her, and that would be a good thing, I thought. I was glad Aunt Helena was living in our house at the moment. She needed all the support and encouragement she could get during this rather tumultuous time when she was trying to regain her memory. This amnesia malarkey is not to be trifled with. It's serious stuff. I couldn't imagine what it must be like to lose your memory like that. I was sad that I had lost Max, my dog, but I couldn't imagine never remembering an animal that I'd always loved. If I forgot Max, I'd be devastated. He's so firmly wedged in my heart, and is always alive in my memories. And if I lost my memory of him, that would be tragic. It really would. I think Aunt Helena's amnesia had caused swelling on the brain. Well, that's what I deduced from the doctor anyway. As I was drying my wet hair with a towel, I sensed something was watching me. I looked up from the curtain of shrubbery and was quite taken aback to see it was my Aunt Helena, looking directly at me. Talk of the devil, I thought.
What the hell was she doing here, staring at me so gormlessly like that? I was 10 years old, but I didn't appreciate being spied on while I was getting changed. I couldn't help but wonder how long Aunt Helena had been standing there gawking at me. To my amazement, I noticed she was wearing an unfamiliar but very flattering flowery dress that I'd never seen before, and her hair was already dry. How was that remotely possible? Moments before, it had been sopping wet from diving under the water. She was smiling at me warmly, and I returned her smile ever so reluctantly. But it didn't meet my eyes, simply because I don't like being caught off guard like this. It's a little like your mother finding you with your hand in the cookie jar. It had given me quite a shock to see Helena standing there. I didn't even know you were there, Aunt Helena. I thought you were swimming with Dad. How did you manage to get dressed so quickly? My aunt appeared not to be listening to me. She gestured for me to follow her. Why don't you come with me now, Hunter? I've got something to show you. I raised my brow in surprise at this point. I was feeling rather befuddled. Now I came to think about it, there was no way that Aunt Helena could have beaten me in getting dressed, as I was the one who'd left the rock pool first. I was still stumped by how incredulous it was that her hair was miraculously dry and mine remained sopping wet. And furthermore, Aunt Helena had arrived at the rock pool wearing red shorts and a t-shirt. So where did this dress suddenly materialize from? She had made no mention of bringing other clothes along with her on the ride. But then again, she was so scatty these days. Anything was a possibility. I knew I'd never seen the flowery dress before, and Aunt Helena never wore dresses, so to say I was taken aback is an understatement. But my mother had informed me that people's personalities can dramatically change after a head injury. Had Aunt Helena become very feminine all of a sudden? The next thing I knew, she'd probably be wearing makeup, and I'd never seen her wear lipstick a day in her life. But nothing would surprise me now. Aunt Helena, I don't understand how you got out of the water so quickly, I repeated. I don't understand. It makes no sense to me. I thought you wanted to stay in the rock pool for a bit longer. Weren't you enjoying yourself in there? You ask too many questions, Hunter. My aunt giggled. You know me. I get things done quickly, don't I? You're upset because I beat you in getting dressed. Come on, I want to show you something. It's very important. You're going to love it. But what about Dad? He's going to worry about us if we wander off, I protested. He'll wonder where we are. I told your dad I had a secret to show you, didn't I? He agreed for me to show you this wonderful thing. Aunt Helena's idiosyncratic behaviour was making my heckles really rise. She'd lost her memory for sure. Even coming here today, she claimed the terrain was all unfamiliar to her. And she had no memories of the rock pools, where she'd regularly come to enjoy a swim on a scorching hot day. Now she was claiming to want to show me a secret. So something felt really off. What was she wanting to show me, I wondered? Was my aunt completely losing her mind? Or was she having a false memory of some kind? Dr. Levine had warned us that this could sometimes happen. One thing I knew for certain is that Aunt Helena was changing before my very eyes, and I didn't want her to change at all. I liked her the way she was. As if sensing my obvious reluctance to follow her, my aunt impulsively grabbed my hand. I was surprised she was this strong, but then I guess if you've played tennis for as long as she has, you probably have a formidable grip. I knew Aunt Helena was one hell of a good tennis player, so it was a promising sign that she still hadn't lost her strength after that accident of hers. Come on, Hunter. Stop being such a wet blanket. I promise you're going to love what I have to show you. I promise you that. What is it? I asked, looking bemused, wondering what it was that appeared to have excited Aunt Helena so much. I couldn't help thinking that she was really losing her mind, and that this was a symptom that had suddenly emerged, that had left me feeling discomposed. What was going on with Aunt Helena? Was she losing her marbles finally? I rather suspected that she was, and this would not go down well with my mother, who pretty much idolized Aunt Helena. Aunt Helena seemed resolutely determined to show me something. There was nothing about her demeanour to suggest she was suffering from an impaired memory. On the contrary, everything about her manner exuded a forthright determination. She walked through the groves like someone who knew exactly where she was going. And that was not right. Something was off, it really was, but I couldn't fathom what it exactly was. I wondered if my mother would think Aunt Helena was acting strange. And what would she say about Aunt Helena's sundress that she was now wearing? For where did that come from? Aunt Helena had never worn dresses. When I tried to pull away from Aunt Helena, she held my hand down with a forceful grip that was so hard that I winced in pain. Her voice became a lot less sweet.
Come on, Hunter, get a move on. We haven't got all day.
It was when I looked up into my aunt's eyes. I realised that this was not my aunt, because her kind brown eyes had gone all yellow. And suddenly I felt terribly afraid. In a trice, the facade that Aunt Helena was wearing just slipped away, like butter sliding down a steaming hot corn cob. In that second, I realised that Aunt Helena was not Aunt Helena. I very nearly fainted on the spot from the sheer shock of it all. The hideous thing I was seeing now was wearing my aunt's image, like a holographic disguise of sorts. I'd been sucked right in, like a lamb being led to the slaughter. I tried to pull my hand away from this hideous beast, but this thing's grip on me was so steely hard. If I'd succeeded, I'd have probably broken my arm. But that was the least of my concerns right now. This thing, whatever it was extremely dangerous. My mind was screaming, "This can't be real. Wake up, Hunter. You're just having a horrible nightmare. That's all this is. It's not real." But I did know that what was unfolding before me was real. I was to learn later, after my father did a lot of research, that this creature that we encountered, I encountered at first, was called the Kushtaka, otherwise known as Ottoman. I had a sense that I would be his very next meal, like a great big fish he'd caught, that he fully intended to get his sharp teeth into. And believe me, this thing had sharp teeth, for when he opened his mouth I could see how razor-sharp they actually were. All I could do in that quintessential moment to help myself was scream out, in the vain hope that my father or Aunt Helena might just hear me. But would my cries for help actually reach the rock pool? And how would they even be able to rescue me from this formidable beast? My father had not come to the rock pools armed, that was for sure. He wouldn't be able to stand up against this creature. I screamed loudly, in the vain hope that someone might just come to my rescue. The Kushtaka laughed at me mockingly, sensing the hopelessness of my situation, enjoying my dismay.
"No point in calling out for help, Hunter," he said in my aunt's voice. "You're all mine now, and you're going to taste jolly good, you are."
I tried to fight this horrible creature off by kicking at him, but I was no match. The Kushtaka threw me over his powerful back and began to run with me through the grove at a very impressive speed. And that was when I knew my life was hanging by a thread. It would all be over for me pretty soon. It made me sad, but another part of me was resigned to my plight, almost as if I had surrendered to the inevitability of my fate. I knew the Kushtaka was running towards the large lake, because he took the trail to the left. That led to the lake. It was quite a popular fishing destination for some folk. I kicked and screamed, and that was when I heard something else running towards me. My first thought it was another Kushtaka. Please God, no. That was going to make my ability to escape this creature all the more impossible. The Kushtaka stopped dead in his tracks, grunting angrily. He sounded pissed off, as if something had annoyingly interrupted his plans. That was when I saw the Bigfoot standing on the path. He stared straight at the Kushtaka, with dark, furious eyes. The two creatures began to fight. And they could fight. If a human being got entwined in that fight, they'd have been killed in a second. The Kushtaka was using his tail, thrashing it around like a deadly weapon, beating the Bigfoot with it. But the Bigfoot nimbly jumped out of his way. I realised the two critters were fighting over me. That was very clear. Fists were flying all over the place. There was growling and roaring and leg-kicking, while all the time the Kushtaka was holding me down with one hand and adjusting his other hand and using both his tail and arm as weapons. I think he didn't want to release his hold on me. I was so afraid that I closed my eyes as tightly as I could. I was begging to God for this to be over. The fighting was so terrifying and seemed to go on forever and ever, until finally the Kushtaka conceded defeat. He handed me over rather swiftly to the Bigfoot, in surrender, looking mortified to have given me up. He slunk away sheepishly down the undulating path that led directly to the lake, looking at me from slumped shoulders, almost like a child who'd been told he couldn't have the ice cream. I stood there on the forest floor, staring up at the Bigfoot with wide, mesmerized eyes. I was terrified because he was so big, so incredibly intimidating, so large in girth and size, much more so than the Kushtaka. I think he could have been 10 foot tall or more, built like the Incredible Hulk, covered in long flowing dark hair. He possessed a human-looking face that reminded me of my late grandfather. I found myself looking directly into his eyes, as if an invisible magnet had drawn me to focus on him. It was when I was looking into his eyes that my fear dissipated, because his eyes were so kind. Kampasi Katwana, Kolombasi Lano. Don't be afraid, young man, the Bigfoot said to me, in words that miraculously translated to me in my head in English. This was way better than any translation app, as I understood everything he was saying. Kolapisa nakwa, koloposolani. You are lucky I rescued you, boy. I heard your cries for help. Kolopati galasana kwa dunsa dilasiko. You mustn't underestimate Dunsa. He's very dangerous. He lives at the lake. That was where I expect he was taking you. He can pretend to be anything he wants to be. That's how he skillfully catches his prey. He didn't want to give you up. I had quite a fight to get you. I knew when I heard your screams that Dunsa had tried to trap you. He did this a couple of weeks back with a poor lady who comes to the woods regularly to swim at the rock pools over there. I always watch over that woman to ensure she's safe. But I was distracted on that occasion, and Dunsa took his chances with her. I knew he would one day do that, and I wasn't wrong. He's always looking for those open gaps of opportunity, like he did today, to get up to his insidious mischief. Kantila sukupona tila sikwasina onto. Let's just say I find when my back is turned for a single second, Dunsa wastes no opportunity to strike. That poor woman tried to escape him. Luckily I heard her screams like I heard your calls for help. I fought Dunsa for that woman, like I fought for you. And finally he released her to me. But she fell back on a rock and hit her head badly, losing her footing. I blame myself for that. I wish I'd caught her in time. But luckily I noticed she's all right. I saw her swimming in the rock pool a moment ago.
That was my aunt you saw. You rescued her, like you rescued me. Thank you for that. I need to go back to the rock pools now, where you saw my aunt and father swimming. They're probably wondering where I've got to. It was at that point I heard my father's voice. He was calling my name.
Hunter! Hunter! Where are you, Hunter?
My father was walking up the trail. He stopped short in his tracks, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Looking back, it was actually quite funny, really. My father's extremely sceptical, you see. He'd never believe in anything that he would consider fanciful, and I'm sure that's exactly what he thought a Bigfoot was, until he saw one standing right next to me. For a second he rubbed his eyes, as if he thought he had to be dreaming, and then his jaw practically dropped wide open, like a Venus flytrap. He was looking from me to the Bigfoot in complete bewilderment, not knowing how to react. For how do you react when you see your son standing next to a 10-foot creature that doesn't appear to be doing your son harm? But then again, how can you be sure of anything until you've read the situation more clearly? Moments later, Aunt Helena emerged behind my father. She looked from me to the Bigfoot, and then an extraordinary thing happened. It was like a light of recognition dawned in her eyes, as if a memory deep within her resurfaced. She pointed her finger at the Bigfoot excitedly, You were the one that rescued me. You saved me from that monster that tried to pretend he was my sister. You saved me. I never got to thank you, because everything went blank when I fell back on that rock. My memory just blacked out. The Bigfoot spoke to us, and paradoxically we understood everything he was saying.
I'm very glad you're all right, ma'am. Dunsa meant to harm you. He saw you as an easy meal. He had the same designs on this young man over here,
he said, pointing to me.
But I rescued him. I have told Dunsa to leave the lake area at once. He is no longer welcome on my territory. I have warned him if he comes here again, I shall kill him myself. He's got off lightly this time, but he went too far. He can't be trusted to behave himself, and I'm not putting up with his nonsense a moment longer. He has got out of control. Twice he has done this. There are plenty of fish in the lake for him to enjoy, but Dunsa loves to play with his prey. And he doesn't need to eat your kind, but he does have an extensive palate. I am the custodian of the woods in these parts, and he has breached his rights to stay here, so he has to move on, or he's dead. It's as simple as that. Now you know you will be safe here in the future, because he will not be coming back.
Thank you so much for saving my nephew, said Aunt Helena, dashing towards me and enveloping me in her arms. She looked up at the Bigfoot gratefully and said, Thank you again. Thank you for saving me and my nephew. The Bigfoot nodded, and then he turned around to address my father.
I see that you've been to a parallel universe. Very interesting. It's not every day your kind gets to visit another layer of our reality. I never expected to see that in one of your kind, but the marking on you is undeniable.
My father looked dumbfounded.
How do you know that? He asked the Bigfoot,
his face dropping to the ground, as if he thought the Bigfoot was a sage of some kind that was about to tell him his entire life story. I didn't know what the Bigfoot meant when he said my dad had been to a parallel universe, but it seemed my father knew exactly what he was talking about, and the expression on his face was one of marvel and wondrous awe.
You have a purple glow to your aura. You've been to Andromeda. It's a parallel universe. If you are dappled with a spot of purple condensation in your aura, then we know you've been to Andromeda. It's like a stamp on your body that affirms you've been there. I've been there myself on multiple occasions, so I've got the purple condensation mark on my aura as well. I can see you're confused about the experience you had. Don't be. Just remember, he said, pointing to the earth, this is not all there is. Many of your kind don't know this, because they are susceptible to confusion, so their minds are closed to these truths, rather like a flower that has not yet opened to see the sun shining upon its petalled face.
At that, the Bigfoot turned around and glided away, before my dad could ask him any more questions. Later, my father did tell us about his experience over the Bermuda Triangle, and about the wormhole he had entered in his plane, where he found himself in a parallel universe, where the ocean water was exquisitely purple. That, I guess, is what the Bigfoot had been talking about when he referred to a parallel universe, of which my father had been privy to seeing. I'm glad to say in the weeks that followed, Aunt Helena completely regained her memory. But the meeting of the Bigfoot in the woodgrove had, I suspected, been the turning point for her. Finally, she told us her story. It was uncannily similar to my own. Let's just say the cunning foe, the Kushtaka, can lure the most unsuspecting among us into his duplicitous traps. Pretty easily, I have to say. Aunt Helena's account. It was horrifying, having to be brought to a hospital by a very kind farmer, and not knowing who I was, or whether I had a family or not, because my memory was so impaired I was drawing blanks. The doctors informed me that I had sustained a nasty head wound that had caused a significant amount of bruising on my brain. I had lost a significant amount of blood, and had several stitches on my scalp,
and many tests were performed on me. Dr. Levine seemed reasonably confident that once the bruising subsided, my body would start to heal and my memory come back. Unless, he said, my memory had been repressed by trauma. I certainly hoped that that was not the case. But it would be a long time before we found the answers. That's what he told me anyway. I was to discover my memory appeared to be annoyingly patchy, rather like looking at a picture book, where half the picture's been torn out, and you try to remember how the other half looked. The good news is my memory came back to me after a very nonchalant visit to a rock pool, where I went to enjoy a swim with my sister's husband and my nephew Hunter. I was thoroughly enjoying myself playing around in the water. When my nephew Hunter had no desire to swim any more, he promptly left the rock pool to go and change back into his clothes behind some shrubbery. I remained in the water with Hunter's father for a little longer, as I was eager to continue swimming. I told Anton that he didn't need to stay with me in the water, and that I was happy to swim alone, but he insisted on staying with me in the rock pool until I finally decided to get out. When we both finished our swims and got dressed, I returned to the ATV, and Anton came towards me looking very agitated. "Have you seen Hunter anywhere?" "No, I can't say I have. I saw him last when he got out of the water to go and change behind the shrubbery. But I haven't seen him since." Anton began to panic. He proceeded to tell me that he was absolutely certain that someone had been watching us when we were swimming in the rock pool. I could see there was genuine fear in his eyes. We both began to run through the woods together, calling out Hunter's name. I was walking behind Anton down the footpath when he stopped dead in his tracks. When I caught up with him, I could see that Hunter was standing next to a large Bigfoot on the trail. And in that pivotal moment, my memories came flooding back. I remembered that this was the Bigfoot that had saved my life, that had rescued me from the Kushtaka. So you may wonder, what did happen to me on the day after I sustained a nasty, rather mysterious head wound, which caused me to lose my memory? Well, it began much like any other routine day. Nothing really special about it. I had been doing tennis coaching with my sister. She was teaching another student on another court. The student I was teaching on that particular day was an obnoxious 14-year-old teenager called Prissy, short for Priscilla, I believe. She was one of the most self-entitled students I've ever had the privilege of teaching. Let's just say, unlike many students I teach, this was a girl that didn't want to be on the tennis court with me. She had no desire to learn how to play the game. It was a hot, unpleasant day. The tennis court felt like a sauna. Prissy began to sulk tirelessly and was completely uncooperative during the game. She didn't even appear to be trying. She willfully complained that she hated tennis and that she was only here because her parents insisted she learnt to play the game. I realized with her stinky attitude she wasn't going to get very far with learning how to play tennis, because with the best will in the world, if you don't want to do something, then you invariably won't succeed in doing it. When Prissy's mother came to pick up Prissy from her lesson in her fancy sports car, I told Prissy's mother in no uncertain terms that I couldn't go on teaching her daughter, and that went down with Prissy's mother like a lead balloon, as you can imagine. "What are you saying, Mrs. Ferguson?" said Prissy's mother, giving me a glare. "Why are you refusing to teach my girl to play tennis? Is my money not good enough for you? Is that it? I'm paying you very good money to teach her tennis." Prissy's mother, Natalie Hewitt, was almost as bad as Prissy herself, I have to say. She had this vainglorious, self-entitled attitude. I think she believed that everybody else, including myself, was beneath her. She was like the queen bee in a colony of worker bees, who fussed around her all day long, so to speak. I was in no doubt that that was how she conducted the affairs of her own life. I'm pretty sure she wore the pants in her household and bossed everyone around, including that husband of hers. "Look, Mrs. Hewitt," I said, "I would very much like to continue teaching your daughter tennis. It's my job to teach tennis. But I'm afraid that Prissy has made it perfectly clear that she hates the game. Her attitude sucks. I'm sure you must agree I can't teach someone to play a game they clearly don't want to learn to play. Quite frankly, it's a waste of your money and a waste of my time." "What are you saying?" snapped Mrs. Hewitt contemptuously. Honestly, listen to yourself, Miss Ferguson. You're so defeatist. What are you talking about? My daughter wants to play tennis, but it's clear to me you don't want to teach her. You're the one that's got the problem. And the stinky attitude that sucks, Miss Ferguson, is not coming from my prissy. It's coming from you, said Mrs. Hewitt. You want to play tennis, don't you, prissy? She said, looking at her daughter for confirmation on this. Prissy nodded her head as if she agreed entirely with her mother, that of course she wanted to play tennis. But she was smirking, and there was a rather self-satisfied smug look on her face, as if she revelled in stirring up trouble, like being a cat among the pigeons and causing chaos wherever she went, which undoubtedly is what she loves to do. So there you go, Miss Ferguson. My daughter has just confirmed to you that of course she loves to play tennis, said Mrs. Hewitt, poking me in the chest with one of her painted, very sharp-pointed talons. So there you go. You'll be teaching my prissy. You'll be teaching her, is that understood? I'll be here at her lesson on Tuesday sharp, and I'll watch the entire game. I don't want you letting me down, Miss Ferguson. I'm paying you good money. Look, Mrs. Hewitt, as I keep saying to you, I'm happy to teach your daughter, but she must change her attitude. I can't possibly teach someone that doesn't want to learn. My daughter wants to learn, Miss Ferguson. She's told you herself, said Mrs. Hewitt, grabbing her daughter's hand and charging off defiantly to her car. We'll be back on Tuesday. See you then. What on earth was all that commotion about, with you, Prissy, and her mother? Asked my sister, when her student was finally picked up by her own mother, and we were enjoying some cold lemonade together. I'd rather not talk about it, I said. I'm going to the rock pool for a swim. Would you like to come? Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? You know me and water. We don't mix. It was a searing hot day as I cycled on the back of my bicycle to the bottom of the dirt road and then finally through the woodland trail. I was so glad to reach the trees so that the hot sunshine was finally cast away and I was shaded by the umbrella they offered. It felt good to be on my own, listening to the pretty trills of the birdsong. I suddenly felt remarkably happy, as all thoughts of Prissy and her pompous mother were cast away. I was greeted to the heady sound of water crashing against the rocks, and I knew I'd reached the rock pool. I parked my mountain bike under a tree, and took my towel and swimming costume out of the basket in the front of my bicycle, and I went to hide behind some shrubbery to change, just in case somebody was around. I knew I had the rock pools to myself, but there were times other people would walk down that trail, and I just did not want to be found in a compromising position. I had once gone skinny dipping in the rock pools, only to discover 4 people in swimming costumes had joined me in the water. I had to wait for them to leave, because I couldn't let them know that I was stark naked. So I could never allow that to happen to me again, for when I emerged from that water, my skin had become a shriveled prune. I felt so invigorated after my swim. It was refreshing and beautiful, the water so cool. At one point I was sure I'd seen a shadowy figure watching me, but I told myself that that impression had been created in my own head, a trick of the light perhaps. Little did I know that the Kushtaka had been watching me surreptitiously. He'd been biding his time, waiting to lure me into his deceptive trap, with about as much cunning as he had done with my nephew Hunter a couple of weeks later. As I got out of the rock pool, I shook myself like a dog with a very thick coat. I grabbed my towel to dry my hair rather vigorously. I then looked around me to see that nobody was around. I wondered, could I take my chance and quickly throw on my clothes? I was sure no one was coming. Just as I'd finished putting on my shorts and my T-shirt, I looked up, rather befuddled, to see my sister walking towards me. She was wearing nothing but a swimming costume, and she had a big grin on her face. Seeing my sister clad in a swimming costume was very surprising, to say the least. She's not a water baby, never inclined to swim. Even when we go to the coast, all she does is lie on a beach towel, reading a book. "What the hell?" I said. "Fancy seeing you here. What are you doing? What does it look like, sis? I've come to join you for a swim." "But you don't even like swimming, I do now, sis. Come on, come with me. Let's go and have some fun, she said, grabbing my hand, leading me to the rock pool, where we began to paddle in the shallow end. And when I looked down at her foot, it started to morph into a webbed foot. I let out a shrill scream, because I realized this person that I was with was not my sister. I think the holographic projection from the kushtaka had all but slipped away. "You're not my sister!" I cried out. "Get away from me! Go away!" I tried to run away from the kushtaka as fast as I could, but in a split second he had grabbed me so hard. I fell on the ground, and his hand was clasped on my foot. He looked down at me with a smirk, and no longer was I seeing my sister, but an 8-foot humanoid creature that resembled an otter. His tail was thrashing around, and with one foot he dragged me over some rocks, through some thorny briars, and finally reached down to pick me up and throw me over his back. And then he began to run with me very fast through the woods, down the left path that led straight to the lake. In that moment I knew I was going to be this critter's dinner, for this thing only had intentions of eating me. Of that I was sure. All I could do was call out for help, and not for a second did I believe any help would arrive. But help was closer than I could have ever envisaged, and there, stomping through the trees, was a huge Bigfoot, possibly about 10 foot tall. When he saw the kushtaka holding me down on his back, he roared with indignant rage. The kushtaka had tried to make his escape from the Bigfoot, but the Bigfoot had run up to him, and a fight ensued between the both of them. Eventually the kushtaka handed me over to the Bigfoot ever so bashfully. But from the recent rains we'd had, the rock I was standing on was so slippery I fell backwards and landed on my head. The Bigfoot told me I was going to be all right, even though I felt very feeble. I intended to walk home instead of take my bicycle, but I guess I must have passed out in the woodgrove for some time, and that was where the farmer found me. All these years later I'm married to Hans, the farmer that I'd met. A very kind man he is too. He visited me in the hospital with flowers. The rest is history. The good news is I've fully regained my memory and still teach a mean game of tennis. And now and then I teach kids like Prissy, but I guess that's life for you. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.